trauma bonding. Completely unconscious. Talk about it in the context of romantic relationships. Have you ever noticed that when you get with someone, it's all love and bliss in the beginning? Because we don't actually show ourselves to each other. In the beginning, we show each other this image of ourselves, or we put forth our repressed, inauthentic self, or our traumatized self gets stuffed down, and the repression of who we are is stuffed down and isn't shown. Our distrust, our fear isn't shown in the beginning. What we show is what we need to show to bond with someone. We show them the bright side. And we do it unconsciously. If we were really, really aware of this, we wouldn't do it. And this is partly because trauma is unconscious. Repression is unconscious. Shame is unconscious. And a lot of fear, which is repressed emotion, is unconscious. So then after we have this honeymoon phase in a relationship, talking about romantic relationship, after a while, the real truth of what we believe comes forward, right? Or, so for example, sooner or later, the love bombs that are happening in the beginning start to quiet a little bit, and what comes to the surface is our trauma responses and reactions in relationship. This is where the relationships start to break down, because this trauma, as it surfaces, it overshadows the love and the connection. So whatever we bonded over in the beginning, or what we thought we bonded over, which was a heart connection or an infatuation or love or sexual or romantic attraction, now it's about fear and distrust, anger. Our old programming comes to the surface. One of the first layers of that is our deficiency story. So, after the honeymoon period, and we get triggered by our new partner, and it's hitting an old button. And this is where we can get caught in a cycle of not seeing it and then continuing to get triggered if we don't make the unconscious conscious in those moments. Because as I've said before, even with a deficiency story, as with all trauma and repression, it's unconscious. So when you're triggered in the initial stages of a relationship, your past wounding is not going to come up for you to see without prompting. That's the trauma research. Trauma doesn't arise, which means our triggers don't arise. If they're trauma related, and most of them are, they don't arise as a memory. They don't arise as the programming of the past for us to see. What arises is in a woundedness, or trigger, a feeling, a reaction, a response that is unconscious. It could be a fight response, fleeing, freezing, fawning, believing a story, responding from that programming or that story, you see. But in the moment, what we might feel is just hurt or anger, and then we respond. And usually when we respond, it's about the present circumstances. It's like, what you're saying now is triggering me. What you just did or didn't do is triggering me. Present circumstances. We see that in awareness because it's happening. We can see the facial expressions. We can hear the words or see the actions or inactions of someone. That's what's arising to us. We can see that, and we can feel and see our woundedness or our upset around that. What we can't see is the unconscious network of thoughts and programming and repressed or resisted emotion that's influencing that trigger. There's the endarkenment. That's the dark matter. The dark matter is running the trigger, but all we see are the present circumstances. So science recently, not too long ago, came up with a finding which I'm totally in alignment with, which is that our triggers, meaning our trauma, is one part present circumstances and one part past. It's the past that doesn't show up in awareness. The past is stored in the body. The body keeps a score. What we see is the present circumstance. Like, he's not hearing me. I'm pissed. You're not hearing me. You're not understanding me. And so we see the present circumstance, which means we see that he or she's not listening, or we interpret it that way. And we think it's just about that in many ways. We may have some inclination that this is a pattern for us. Intellectually, we may know it. But do you actually see the unconscious programming coming up when you're saying, I'm unheard? Here's another thing. Even the top layer of that is unconscious, because when we get triggered with a deficiency story or from a deficiency story, we often can't even name the identity. We had to develop the boomerang in KI or LI, years ago to illuminate what is the identity that's being triggered there, the deficiency story. I myself noticed that when I would be triggered by my ex-husband, it would just be a feeling of woundedness. And the story that I'm unlovable would be unconscious in those moments. So I was operating from that filter, not seeing it, because that's the endarkenment, the dark matter. So with the boomerang is a simple exercise where you pull up someone in awareness that has triggered you. Here it was my spouse, my first husband. I'm laughing because I never thought I would say I've been married twice. But first husband would say or do something, and then the response would often be focused on him. And that's another way we hide the unconsciousness from it. We saw it's his problem, what he's doing. And then we focus on fixing, changing him. That's just one way in which we hide even the top layer of what I call the top layer, the low-hanging fruit, which is right there, there's an identity operating. And with a boomerang, we ask, okay, so what deficiency story or deficient identity is arising here in this trigger? Feel down into the body, let the body speak, and the body says, I'm unlovable, or I'm not heard, right? I'm not heard in that situation. I'm not heard. That's an identity. And so we may have been carrying that around from the past, but the past won't show up in awareness fully. So we don't see in the moment that he's not hearing us, that, oh, dad didn't hear me. We may see glimpses of it, but this person didn't hear me, and that I felt unheard here and here and here and here. We don't usually, even if we get glimpses, we don't see the full network of that. And so with that being unconscious, that's what's fueling the present trigger. That's the one part present, one part past. It's the past that's unconscious in that moment. So we have to get under that. We have to see it in order to be free from it. One of the first things we can do is start to name the deficiency story. And that's really only the surface layer, because all that is connected to trauma and repression and core woundedness in the body that we can't see, past programming. But at least with the boomerang, we can see, oh, presently I'm believing that I'm unheard. And we can go into inquiry on that. I'll just give you a little bit of a tool here. Just reverse it. So whatever your deficiency story is, use reverse inquiry. If it's I'm heard, what you want to say is, if the deficiency story is I'm unheard, then you reverse it. I'm heard completely by him or her. And that's going to, you don't say it as a positive affirmation. You say it as something that prompts up the objection. So what comes up is like, no, I'm not heard. And then you start to watch and allow the thoughts that come up with that, to object with that, just allowing each one at a time, along with the energy, all from awareness. And it's just you can do that later. That's one of the first inroads to this, is reverse inquiry on the deficiency story. Trauma bonding is much, much deeper than that. So we're definitely bonding from our deficiency stories, and that's the identity that's often connected to the trauma and the repression. That's one way that we're bonding, but we bond in other ways. Trauma bonds. In other words, if I'm repressing anger, which I did, or maybe you repress anger or something else, you might seek out a partner that will not bring that up, or that will bring it up if you're open to it. But a lot of times when we're repressing emotion, we're not actually open to being with people who would push that button. So some people are getting into relationships that are not trauma bonds in the terms of toxic fighting, but more like toxic peacemaking, toxic agreeability. Like you push down your actual wants and needs. You don't set a boundary. You don't speak freely about how you think and feel. You repress or suppress that. And maybe you've been doing that all your life. That's the trauma, the repression. And then you meet somebody and you might be drawn to them because you can see that they wouldn't push those buttons. They're safe. And so your anger or your other emotion can stay repressed. That can create all sorts of issues in relationship. And it doesn't look like it. It might look from the outside as very peaceful. It's like, well, they really love each other. They don't ever fight. But it could be actually a trauma response, like people pleasing, anger, repression, and then you're bonded to that. There are people who are doing this work who've bonded through people pleasing and peacemaking. And then as they start to do this work, they see that that's the nature of the trauma bond. It isn't that they're fighting in a toxic way. There's all sorts of ways that trauma bonds come up. These are just a few of them. Like you can bond in any way over your trauma. Like if you believe fundamentally that you're not good enough, you may actually pick people unconsciously that reinforce it. And again, in the honeymoon phase, you don't see it. But sooner or later, it starts to rear its head, and you're looking to your partner unconsciously to confirm that story. So it's like there's antennas up, and you're looking for your partner to say or do or not say or do something that triggers that. And as soon as that happens, the conditioning goes, yes, that's it. It's all unconscious, and then you're triggered and you're caught in that. See, how do you extricate yourself from that if that conditioning isn't arising? You're at the mercy of it. And this is where the Eastern practices, the resting as awareness, meditation, mindfulness, really will not get to it, folks. I mean, sure, you can see through some of these triggers, but, I mean, somewhat. But the deep unconsciousness that's driving it doesn't come to the surface. So in some ways, people are often just dealing with very surface, almost superficial conditioning that's coming up around the present circumstances and not seeing how the past held in the body is influencing the trigger. So that embodiment is really not about resting as awareness. That's part of it. Like we rest and notice and allow from our true nature, but we have to be more skillful to pull up this programming. Otherwise, we'll continue to bond from our trauma. And in bonding from our trauma, it's a recipe for more suffering. It really is. And people are caught in these cycles. Not only are they caught within the cycle within a relationship, but many people leave a relationship or a relationship breaks up because there's not enough consciousness in the relationship, not enough awakeness to see through these patterns. So these patterns destroy the relationship or erode the heart connection after a while. So that fear and anger and distrust and deficiency and lack and trauma and repression really start to run the show for people. Now, waking up out of the trauma bond is interesting. I sometimes I've been using the term that there's an unconscious agreement to suffer among humans, and it's collective, actually. So as you start to wake up and embody and make conscious these patterns in your life, the people in your life, just forget romantic relationship for a second. Just the people that you know, others, are part of that collective agreement to suffer. So there's a pressure not to wake up and embody this, because if you do, you might lose what you find to be these bonds with people, because you're transforming. And the collective agreement to suffer is based on the idea that we're not going to look at this stuff and that we're going to bond over our suffering. Misery loves company. So just on a collective scale, that happens. As you start to wake up and transform, you can actually find yourself leaving certain groups or communities or like-minded, groups where you were bonding from this unconscious agreement to suffer, and you're not suffering in that way anymore. So the group or the community doesn't feel like home anymore, and that can be scary. You have to kind of move out of that. And what I say to people is, as you're transforming, you can't wait around for other people to transform. And you can't even wait around for them to understand your transformation, because if you do, you're buying into that. You're buying into the unconscious agreement to suffer. That's what it is. It's like an agreement that we're not going to question this. We're going to bond over it. And as we start to question it, that upsets the whole thing. Now, the same thing happens in a relationship. Many people are coming to KI and they're realizing that they're bonding in relationship. So they're asking questions in terms of, is this the right relationship for me? Or if this relationship is going to work, we have to become more conscious. Really, both sides, or at least one side, has to become more conscious of the patterns for the relationship to grow and to become an even deeper connection. And if both parties aren't doing that, there can be frustration. Obviously, because one person in the relationship is seeing the nature of things and the other one isn't really introspective in that way. And you can come to a crossroads, like, is this the right relationship for me? And it's a question we all have to ask. But if you simply stay in the relationship without questioning this stuff, it's like you're buying into that agreement, that unconscious agreement to suffer that trauma bond. And so all the suffering that comes with that is going to continue. So the impetus to wake up comes from seeing the suffering and not waiting around for your partner, for example, to transform. And some people then will leave relationships, or the relationship will deepen through this work, especially if both sides are self-reflective and looking at this stuff. But this is really challenging, and this is what keeps people, I think, part of what keeps them from waking up or resisting the trauma and repression work, because they've bonded with people from that programming. I hear it all the time. People will say, well, I mean, the anger repression is creating massive pain in my body, or contraction, or emotional wounding. But I don't want to get angry, because if I get angry, then I might lose that person. They might not love me. There's the trauma bond. You're bonding from and through the repression. Repression is connected directly to trauma. So you stay, right? Because there's this unconscious agreement that we're going to suffer together from our trauma. It's unconscious. I hear it all the time. Not even around anger, but like sadness. Like, there's people who feel like they cannot show vulnerable feelings to their partner. Not just anger, but other vulnerable emotions. And so then there's still this belief that if I were to share that, they might not love me, or it wouldn't be safe. And so you don't. You don't come out of repression. Therefore, you're still bonded in that way. Not through anger repression, but through the repression of other emotions. Even your story that I'm not safe, or content beyond repression, just trauma imprints and the programming that go. So we're looking to reconfirm our trauma. You have to understand that. Like, the imprints of the past, excuse me, the imprints of the past from mom and dad, schoolyard bullies, anyone who played a pivotal role in our trauma, these memories and this programming is deeply ingrained into the body unconsciously, and there's an unconscious mind connected to it, but it's often offline. So these imprints carry programming. And if you can't see the imprinting and see the programming, you're operating from it. And then you're going to be bonding with other people from it. There's a million examples of that. It's not just repression of anger or other emotion. It's the trauma imprint itself. Like the feeling of I'm not safe with other people. I don't trust other people. Coming from the past, some distrust issue or fear or safety issue from the past is imprinted within you and your body, and it's looking to confirm itself in relationships. So you get into a relationship, it's all love and light in the beginning, and then suddenly now distrust comes to the surface from the past. But if you can't recognize the pattern, you're unconscious to it. The distrust could easily sabotage the relationship, or the fear or the psychological need for emotional safety sabotages the relationship in various ways. Sabotage is a big phenomena for us. It's connected directly to our trauma. It's not an intentional thing. We're not intending to sabotage. This is our programming is acting itself out. We're really trying to seek to confirm the truth of the trauma. Like, oh, I really am unsafe. No, I really can't trust people. See? I can't trust you. You proved it. And so it solidifies and strengthens the egoic programming to be looking and confirming our suffering in relationship. And of course, it's disastrous for the relationship. It can be. So what's the answer is to make the unconscious conscious. Easier said than done. But it's really important in relationship. Otherwise, you just keep getting ensnared in this way. And many of you, like me, have maybe seen a pattern of many relationships. Not every one of my relationships ended because of unconscious trauma. Some of them ended because I became aware of the trauma, aware of the operating system. And then by being aware of it, there's a discernment. Is this what I want? is this the partnership that is right for me? Have I learned everything that I need to learn? Have I made conscious everything that I can make conscious with this person? And then it's not callous. It's just like, well, there's nothing else here. Like, the patterns here are stuck. My partner isn't looking at stuff, so they're stuck there. And then you have to kind of make that decision. Is this what I really want? And so some relationships, as I become more awake, so to speak, I have ended because of clarity, not because of trauma, but being aware of the trauma, making the unconscious conscious, and then realizing this isn't the right place for me. I was bonding in the beginning from trauma, and I'm not anymore. But earlier relationships are different. They were different. I was just going for people who would confirm the trauma unconsciously, and they would do it like clockwork. Like, yep, can't trust you, right? You prove that I'm unlovable. You're proving that I'm broken. And here we are going from relationship to relationship, not finding the deep fulfillment and heart connection that we long for, basically because of what we believe, and we can't see it. Now, people will hear this, and they'll say, and they'll go back to their old practices. Resting as awareness. Shine the light of awareness on anything that arises, and then everything will be resolved. But if this unconsciousness was going to be resolved by that practice, meditation, mindfulness, then it would have already been resolved. And some people think that if they understand this intellectually, now by understanding it intellectually, now the trauma is going to come to the surface, the repression will, and it doesn't work. Because this is unconscious material. The intellectual mind can't get at it. So you can think about it, talk about it, understand it, become trauma-informed, repression-informed, and still be acting out the same patterns. You have to go back to your practice and see that if your practice was going to shine a light on this, it would have already shined a light on it. And by intellectually knowing it, that doesn't mean the unconscious is going to come to the surface. It really only comes to the surface when prompted by skillful means, which could be KI or some other modality that prompts it up for you to see. So if you go back to your old resting as awareness, you're kind of living in the dark. I say to people is you can be asleep in awareness. This is a new thing that we're talking about, but repression and trauma hides in the recognition of awareness. It hides as the body until there's embodiment, meaning the programming from the body comes into awareness. But until then, you can be doing your meditation, mindfulness, resting as awareness, just waiting to see whatever it's supposed to show you, and it doesn't show it to you. And so that's the recipe for continued triggers in the same manner in relationship, getting caught up in the same way, or moving from one relationship to the other, which ends because of this trauma bonding, or which stays, you stay with someone longer than is healthy because of the trauma bonding. This is exciting, guys. And I want to add one little point here. And people have said, here's another thing, when you start to wake up out of this, there's going to be backlash in your relationships and in your collectives, your groups, your communities, because there's an agreement that we're suffering together. It's unconscious. And so as just on the surface layer, as you start to wake up, it can trigger other people's deficiency story. Because that's how we kind of, on the level of form, how we know who we are. I'm not good enough. And then someone that I'm in a relationship with starts to wake up out of this stuff, and it sort of mirrors back, oh, I'm really not good enough. It triggers that trauma. Literally, other people waking up will trigger other people's trauma. And they can't see it. But you cannot, I'll say it one more time before we go, you should not wait or be concerned about that, because that's the unconscious agreement to suffer. That's the trauma bond showing itself. Don't wait around for other people to transform. Don't wait around for people to understand what's happening for you. Because if you do, you're staying trauma bonded to them. See that? So there's going to be backlash as you wake up and embody this, make this stuff conscious. There's going to be shifting in relationship, boundary setting, like no thank you anymore. That relationship doesn't work for me. Or speaking up more and speaking your truth, your emotional truth, for a deeper relationship, like, right? But that doesn't mean that your partner or others are going to see it that way. They may see it as threatening. Even if you start to get angry or you start to express it, you're not being mean. You're just expressing I'm angry. You're not in repression. That can trigger someone's stuff because they got to know you through the trauma, right? That's who they think they're in a relationship with. So as you start to transform, it's like, who is that person? That's not who I married. And that's threatening. It can be threatening. But when other people are triggered by your transformation, you have to be very careful, because if you don't inquire into it, you might get sucked right into it and then right back into the trauma bond, or right back into the unconscious agreement, to the collective unconscious agreement to suffer. You don't even realize that you're staying right in that. See, by not inquiring into this when it comes up, there's tremendous freedom from this, guys. It's nuanced. It's body. It's not like I'm awareness. That's part of it. I'm the awareness. This is making things conscious. So this is the body, because the body keeps the score. As you do this work, the body becomes more and more translucent, warm, empty, but full. There's embodiment that happens. Like the awareness goes all the way into the body to meet the programming of the past. All that programming comes into awareness, and your operating system is now seen. And then now that it's seen in awareness, it can start to transmute. That's the transformation there. See? It's not just I'm awareness. It's embodiment. I'll be back.